याद रख तू कौन है, पर्वत को चीर फाड़ेगा तू। पंख नहीं दिखते तेरे, पर भर ले तू ऐसी उड़ान। उड़ जा नन्हे पंछी, कर दे सब परिंदों को तू हैरान। कोशिशों से मिलती कामयाबी, कामयाबी का तू हकदार है। रास्तों की खाके ठोकरें, जीतने के लिए तू अब तैयार है। ओ रुकना कैसा, डरना कैसा। बात नहीं कोई अब डरने की, कर ले जिद आगे बढ़ने की। बात नहीं कोई अब डरने की, कर ले जिद आगे बढ़ने की।
Good evening, everyone. I'm your host, Manpreet. Welcome to the third season of IST Practicals by Internshala Trainings. IST Practicals is a series of free online masterclasses delivered by industry experts. These 45-minute sessions are all about teaching students important concepts, softwares, and tools. Every IST Practical is an opportunity to experience practical learning. This episode is about real-life applications of SAS in clinical trials, analysis, and reporting. Our presenter today is Mr. Aslam Khan. He works with large pharmaceutical companies in the US in understanding their complex business problems, offering strategic direction through viable technological solutions, overseeing change management program, and organizational project management. He has extensive experience working in the pharmaceuticals industry, especially in clinical data management, biostatistics, and clinical programming areas, leading SAS and statistical programming activities for clinical trials on many pivotal drug approval submissions to the FDA in the US. He is a SAS-based and advanced certificate programmer with an MS degree in Management Information Systems from the University of Texas. He loves teaching and simplifying anything that appears to be complex. So I hope you will enjoy this webinar with him. We have a very special gift for you at the end, so stay tuned for that. And without further ado, let's welcome Aslam.
Thank you so much, Manpreet. And good afternoon, everyone on the call. I really hope that you and your loved ones are doing well, and I hope you will enjoy this training. This webinar is going to be about clinical trials, analysis, and reporting using SAS. And it's a training that, as Manpreet mentioned, I love simplifying anything that is complicated. And a topic that is complicated is about talking about clinical trials. And it certainly needs to be simplified in the sense that is understandable to most people. I will be explaining to you what are the foundational concepts of clinical trials and how do we do analysis and reporting. And what you see on the screen as using SAS is as a predominant tool that we use in the pharmaceutical world. So before we get started, I want to ask you a few questions. Let me share my screen. Okay. I'm sure you all must have taken pain medications at some point in time in your life. And I hope it's the pain medications for simple resolution of pain that you may have here and there in your life. And could I know the answer to this, that I'm sure all of you must have taken pain medications. Some things like this, like Advil, the CombiFlams. Here in the US, we take Tylenol a lot for simple pain medications and stuff like that. What I want to ask you is, would you be confident and would you trust taking these medications without questioning where they come from? And the answer to most of from you would be that it's you would be pretty much confident in taking these medications. But the next screen, what I'm going to be showing you is, would you be comfortable taking a pain medication that looks like this? Will you ever take this pain medication that you do not know the source and you do not know where it's coming from? And why not? Okay, can I have some quick responses to why would you hesitate in taking a medication that looks something like this? Not because it looks old or it appears to be pretty old and not recent, but rather, why would you not take it? Let's see some responses to this. I see a lot of no's, but why? Why would you not take it? Okay, lack of information is certainly that thing, and I see clinical trials have been done on them. Yes. Unhygienic, yes, of course. And there are many other reasons, right? So you have in your mind all these questions about, why would I take this medication when I do not trust the source from it? And that is the most important question, is trust behind it. And as I think one of you also pointed out, that you do not know if a clinical trial has been performed on this medication that you see on the screen. And that is precisely what we'll be talking about in the next 45 minutes. I want to start off with giving you a really high-level overview of what is within the pharma industry in terms of the various components that make up the pharma industry. Okay, so we'll start off with, of course, on the left are the patients, and it could be you, it could be anyone in your loved ones or anybody that you know of who is suffering from a medical condition, right? It's basically, patient is someone who is suffering from a condition that they want to find a cure for that medical condition. The other component in the pharma industry is, of course, the pharma company itself, which is in the business of making and selling those medications. But right in the middle is the drug, what we call the drug or the medicine or whatever you want to call it. It's that medical drug that cures the patient of the medical condition. But those are not just the three components of the pharma industry. What really underlies within the drug is the molecule or the compound that really is at the foundational level of the medical or the medicinal product. It is usually a molecule, small or big in nature. We won't go into those details, but it's that molecule that interacts with your body, and it brings the benefits along with it in terms of curing that underlying medical condition. So it is the molecule that is part of the drug that is really the beneficial part of curing the disease. But how do you take that molecule and convert it into a useful product is done through what we will know today as the clinical trials. So these are really the high level components that, and of course, I'm simplifying a lot here. There's a huge amount of other activity that goes on into the pharma industry, which of course we won't have time today to go into it. But here's what I'm trying to say here is that from the molecule that we just discussed and going to the approved drug, there are various stages within the pharma world that the molecule or the compound has to go through before it can be put to use for common public. And the reason why many of you answered no to the previous screen where I showed you the drug that you did not trust from was because the middle portion of clinical trials was not done. Because rather, anyone in their, probably in their garage or anywhere, could probably take grind some molecules or compounds that they think is beneficial. And in the olden days, in the late 1900s or even before that, people would do precisely that. They would just cook up some medicine that they think is useful and go sell it in the market. Those days are gone. These days, you have to go through, any company that wants to put out a drug has to go through rigorous clinical trials, drug development process. And this is what we call in the middle, or the clinical trials, or the drug development process. And when in doing so, it takes on a different name. This drug that is not approved yet by the regulatory authorities takes on a name called as the investigational new drug, or simply IND. It is the IND that goes through multiple phases of the clinical trials process, and we will look into a few more details about it in the next few minutes. So what I want to show you here is, again, a really high-level overview of what is the clinical trials process and the various phases within it. So we saw step number one, starting off with the molecule, then it takes on the name of IND, investigation new drug, and then approved drug, which is when it is really approved by the regulatory authorities, where you can start using it for public consumption. But in doing so, there are a lot of phases that you have to go through. And I'm illustrating here on a high level, what does it take really to put the drug into the market, starting with the molecule. So in the beginning, what you do is you start off with taking the drug, or at least the IND, which is not yet approved, and test it on animals in various laboratories. And it's done in the animals like mice or monkeys, and sometimes dogs and other animals that is suitable. And it's usually at this time done completely in the laboratories. There are various tests done on them, and then there are various results that are noted down for how the animals are reacting to the drug, and if it's becoming harmful to them, that would mean that it is certainly going to be harmful to the humans when they take. So at that point, they determine really, is it safe to be ingested into humans or not? So with those, in this phase, what is this phase called as is preclinical, which is not shown here, is that this is called as a preclinical phase. And the reason is that it's not yet into the humans. And that is the reason why it's called preclinical. But however, once the preclinical phase is done, the phase 1, 2, and 3 are really the most important phases that the drug, the IND, goes through, which is when it is introduced into the humans. The phase 1 is really a phase where there are very few number of people involved, about 10 to 30 people, not that many. Probably in some corner of the world where they need to address that medical condition or disease, a few subjects or patients are selected from that population, and a very few number, like I said, 10 to 30 people are part of this clinical study in phase 1, which is when they determine is it really safe to introduce into the humans. So all the studies that happen at this phase are pertaining to studies what are called as safety-related studies. So at this point, they are really determining if it's really safe to be introduced into the humans, and to what level of dose is it really safe to introduce into the humans. So they do a lot of PK or PD studies, pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic studies, which are really going to determine to what level of dose interactivity is it safe to be introduced into the humans. And there's various other analysis that is done at this point. Then the phase 2 is when they will ramp up the studies with a lot more subjects. And at this point, it's going to be about 30 to 100 people. And as you can see, the number of subjects and people increase probably double or triple fold at this point in various studies in the phase 2. In phase 2, again, the focus is on safety, in determining if they expand the use of this medication to larger populations, how safe is it still to be used and consumed by humans? And there are various studies that are also associated in this phase. Moving on to the next phase, which is phase 3, is when really things become very critical, because at this point, you are at the end of determining if the drug is not only safe, but also is it really effective in curing the medical condition. So that is why what you do at this point is not only do we do safety studies, but also efficacy studies. So the two studies that are primarily done at this point are safety and efficacy. And it's the efficacy that will really determine if that drug or the IND is going to cure the medical condition. because you've already determined in the previous two phases, is it safe to be ingested into humans or not? The focus at this point is to prove that, and I use the word prove because it's going to be very necessary and important to for the company to really prove the efficacy of the drug for curing the medical condition to the regulatory authorities. At this point in the phase 3, the number of subjects could be 300 or more, and it could even go to tens of thousands of people across the world in multiple sites, in multiple countries, and so on. Because you really now want to expand the use of the drug and testing on the drug in multiple populations, various demographics, and various subject groups that you can possibly do. So at the end of phase 3, like I mentioned, what the company who is trying to put the drug out is going to prove to the regulatory authorities is that the drug is really safe or not. And there's a whole host of statistical analysis that goes on with it that really determines those two aspects. What I mentioned here is FDA in blue. However, and that is the authority in the US who is tasked with ensuring that the drug is safe and efficacious to be introduced into the market. And it's a government authority that determines that. In many of the countries, you might have other similar regulatory bodies who do similar authorization of the drug in that particular market. So once that determination is done that the drug is really safe and it can then be introduced, and you will see it appear. And of course, the manufacturing takes place in various manufacturing units, and the whole host of marketing that is done. Which is what I'm not showing here. There's other details to it, but then you will start to appear at the end of it that the drug appears in your pharmacies and your medical stores and other places where you can really go and buy it. And of course, if it's a prescription drug, with the prescription from the doctor. So those are the high level phases in clinical trials that you typically notice for clinical trials happening. What I want to now move on is another topic, which was about SAS and how is SAS pertains to using in the use of clinical trials. And as you can see, from the beginning to the end, SAS is one predominant tool that is used primarily in this industry for various analysis and reporting that is done. And we'll see a few examples of how easy it is to use SAS, and pretty much anyone with any background could be easily be using SAS for this purpose. It's time for a quick quiz. So from what I covered today in the first few minutes, let me ask a few questions pertaining to clinical trials. And what you see here is multiple choice format questions, which is very similar to what you will notice on the platform, on the Internshala's platform, where we have all these courses. And in fact, apart from this course on clinical trials, you have wonderful other courses that you should probably start looking into it. When you take a course and when you enroll into a course, you will see multiple choice questions appear. In fact, this whole host of assignments and other videos that you can browse through and listen at your own convenience. So what you see here is the typical multiple choice questions format. And you can pick and choose the right answer, and then you will be given if that choice is right or not. And you'll also be given an explanation why it is wrong or right. So the first question here is that in which phase of the clinical trial is the investigational new drug first ingested into humans? Can I see some answers in the chat? In which phase of the clinical trials is the investigational new drug first ingested into humans? Is it preclinical, where it's usually done in the lab for animals, phase 1, 2, or 3? Okay, and I see a lot of phase 1, and that is the right answer. Because that is the first time when it is really ingested into humans, when there is studies associated to the safety is done in phase 1. Okay, let me then go to the next question. After which phase in the clinical trial process is the IND drug approved by regulatory authorities? In which phase is the IND approved by the regulatory authorities? Or rather, after which phase is it approved by the regulatory authorities. Preclinical, phase 1, 2, or 3. Well, as we discussed, phase 1 was really towards the safety. Phase 2 was a little bit more of safety and slightly efficacy. But after phase 3 is when you would determine whether the drug is fully going to be safe and efficacious to be introduced into the market, which is when you submit it to the authorities for approval. And the answer in this case would be phase 3, as many of you have already pointed out. Okay, so let's then go back to the slides and moving on to the other slides I have. Okay, so what I want to now do is slightly switch gears and talk about the various data flow aspects in terms of the clinical trials phases that you do. So what really happens is, in the phases that we discovered, phase 1, 2, and 3, there's a whole host of data that is collected across the breadth of the phases that you will be doing. So in the beginning, you would start off with a CRF, which is really form sheets that are data collection form entries that patients or the investigators enter data about various questions that are asked in the CRF. The CRF is basically case report form. Case report form. And these are really the entry points of any data that is going to be collected across the clinical trials process. So what happens then is that once the data is input into the CRF, there is the data stored in various electronic data capture systems, or the EDCs as they call it, in the form of raw data. And at this stage, the data is really in its crude form, and there's much of activity that has to be done for the raw data at this point, which is collected about the patients. And I'll show in the next few slides how does the data look like, and we'll look at an example of a demographics table that you can see how the CRF looks like. So once the raw data is collected in its various form, it has to be modified in some fashion where it makes sense for doing further analysis downstream. So at this point, you start using SAS as a primary tool, which we'll talk about also in the next few minutes, to precisely do this. So the derived data is another form of data. It is more of a refined form of raw data with additional variables and additional derivations that are done at this point. Then it goes into the analysis data set, which are the standardized data sets in the form of CDISC. And then those data sets are then converted into graphs or plots, and then reports, which are then primarily used with the regulatory authorities for the analysis and reporting that has to be done for the drug, for the IND. Moving on to how would you actually convert, or rather build, the clinical study report, or simply called CSRs, in a typical clinical trial study. So you take a CRF, which we just discussed, put it into the raw data form, or collect it in that in various EDCs or databases, which is in the raw form, and then translate it into derived data sets using SAS at this point. And again, using SAS, you would construct reports, which I just mentioned. It could be graphs or plots or reports. One such example that we will discuss next is the demographics table, which is really the foundational table that is used in the submission of the reports to the regulatory authorities, which talks about the patient's demographies and where the various aspects of the patients that you will just see now. This is how a typical demographics case report form looks like. And as you can see, it talks about the date of birth of the patient, the gender, their ethnic origin, race, and stuff about the patients. And of course, it does have other study-related, like protocol, if it's an oncology study, some kind of notation that denotes that it's related to some study. some site number where it is collected, some subject number, and some initials and stuff like that. The demographics table looks very similar to this, where you will have data that is summarized about the patients and denoted in this particular form, where you can see that age is summarized into N, mean, median, standard deviation, and those from the statistical background here will can understand what these parameters mean in terms of what additional information it gives and insight it gives about the demographics. And then they're broken down by the various treatment groups, which is the placebo, the active treatment, and then summarized by the total number of patients who are here. It's also broken down by gender and then the race. And if they have additional summarizing aspects, they could have that as well included in the demographics table. So what we'll do next is I want to show you how is SAS used for this particular process. So you take the CRF on the left, which is, as we saw, the demographics table, and we convert it into, or rather, do all the SAS programming to be able to construct the final clinical study report that you see here on the right, which is the demographics table. What you will notice is that there are elements of CRF that appear into the report, where the date of birth is summarized, as you see here in the age group, with mean, median, standard deviation, minimum and maximum, and much more, broken down by the treatment groups. And then there's this gender, which is also summarized here. And then the ethnic origin is summarized here. So you'll have a one-to-one translation of what is in the CRF into the demographics table. And in between is when you will construct, rather go through this process. What you see here on the top is take the raw data set, do the derived data set analysis, and construct the reports using SAS. So in the few minutes we got available, I want to quickly walk you through some of the steps that we use to create the demographics table. So here, what we're trying to do is now switching gears into understanding what is a SAS data set. For those of you who are new to SAS, SAS is, as I mentioned in the beginning, is a tool that is predominantly used in the pharma industry for efficient management and processing of data that other programming languages do not have those capabilities. Or rather, I should say, they do have the capabilities, but it's very difficult to manage data in those programming languages. So SAS has been seen or known to be a very easy language to manage data. And what is SAS? I think I've seen one of the question appear there. SAS is basically a company. It's the full form of which it is Statistical, I'm sorry about that spelling here, Statistical Analysis System, or sometimes Statistical Analysis Software. And it's a company that is based in the US that has, I think back in 1960s is when they created this software primarily for some statistical analysis, very basic statistical analysis. And then it became really big, and they now do a host of other things in addition to the statistics. So now it is used, like I mentioned, predominantly as a tool in the pharma industry. And they have this software called as, well, also by the name of the company, which is SAS. And within it, there are various modules. And the good thing is, for those of you who are new, SAS is free to learn. You can pretty much install it, or rather, there's no installation required. It's always on the cloud, where you can register to use it for free. This training that we have on Internshala is precisely does that. It shows you how to register for SAS for free, and it takes you through this 12-hour course, or rather videos, that trains you on SAS in addition to the clinical trials. So it gives you the end-to-end understanding of how to use SAS and how to use that practically in a clinical trial setting. So it certainly helps you from a career standpoint to learn SAS. And if you are willing to enter into the industry of pharma, you will learn how to apply those concepts in the clinical trial world. So a SAS data set at its foundation it looks precisely like this. It is basically a tabular format containing variables on the top. As you can see here, name, gender, age, and weight are the names of the variables. And on the left are the observations which flow downwards. So it's a two-dimensional data set in which you will have data about patients, about the medical condition, about the adverse events, and much more, depending on which industry you're using. In the pharma industry, you would have data about the subjects, right? So this is a SAS data set broken down by variables and observations. They're also called as rows, or rather, this is columns. And observations are also called as rows. What we'll now also do is take a quick moment to understand how does SAS syntax look like. For those of you, again, who are new to SAS, I should mention that it's very easy to learn. And what you will see is it contains syntax that is very easy to grasp. It's nothing like other programming languages where you have to learn very weird forms of coding. But here in this case, anyone pretty much can understand this because it makes a lot more intuitive sense. For example, as you see here, this is a data set about cars. As you can see, data followed by cars. And then something to do with where you bring in the data from. It's stored in a library, which we will not go into in much details, but it simply says that you're bringing in data from one data set into another data set, and you're copying it as is. And this data set is cars. And then it's followed by a run statement, which is kind of like ending that module of data step. There are other forms of SAS code, which is the proc procedures. Excuse me. So the proc procedures are simply procedures or modules of code that does something on the data set, which in this case is cars. And then in this case, it prints the data set for you to view it on your screen. The three aspects to the SAS syntax is that it usually begins with a SAS keyword. And as you see here, the keywords here are data. And in this case, proc. And it's like I mentioned, it's very intuitive to understand what those keywords are. And they usually mean something. And then it always ends with a semicolon. As you see here, all SAS statements end with a semicolon at the end of those statements. The last one being that the SAS code is free form and it's free text, and it's case insensitive. You can pretty much write in any case, uppercase or lowercase, and it can begin anywhere and end anywhere. Excuse me. What I'm trying to show here again is that SAS data step and proc step are two ways of writing code in SAS, in addition to there are much more ways of writing, like using macros and other stuff. But SAS data step simply modifies the data step into something, and then the proc step, it modifies it into a report, or it does something to do with the data. So it's time for now a quick quiz from what we learned so far. Okay, a SAS data set is made up of what? As we just saw, what is a SAS data set is made up of what? Okay, I see a lot of answers there. It's A, B, C, D, pretty much everything, right? So the answer is D, which is all of the above, because SAS data set is made up of rows and columns, or they're also called variables and observations, and of course data elements, which is the cell contents of what is stored within the data set. Let's go to the next question. Every SAS statement ends with what? And we just discussed that. Every SAS statement ends with a symbol. Is it a comma? Is it a period? Is it a semicolon, or is it a colon? Okay, I see some answers. C, B. The answer in this case is semicolon, as we just discussed. Every SAS statement ends with a semicolon. Okay, so the next question is, all data steps and proc steps in SAS end with what statement? As we just saw, every module of a data step and a proc step, they end with a line of SAS statement that is what? Is it a stop statement or a run statement, submit, or an end statement? Yep, semicolon, of course, but then it's ending with a statement, which is a keyword followed by a semicolon. And the answer is run statement. As we just saw, every SAS data step and a proc step ends with a run statement. It's run followed by a semicolon. Okay, so I think that was pretty much it in terms of all the questions we have. So let's go back to the few more slides we got left to finish this webinar. So what I want to take a few moments now is to talk about how you can use this knowledge that you acquire from the trainings on Internshala with respect to clinical trials and SAS programming put together, and use it for your career path that may look like this. If you are at an entry-level position, there are various opportunities in the pharma or the life science world to get into. And some of the opportunities are listed here, and these are not the full list of opportunities that exists, but a few illustration of what may exist out there. So positions like data analysts, medical analyst, statistical analyst, healthcare analysts are some entry-level positions that are easy to get into as long as you have the skills of SAS programming. And as we mentioned just now, the SAS programming is one programming language that is predominantly used, and it's very easy to get into. Given the nature of the coding and the syntax is very easy to understand and very intuitive to understand. And that makes it all the more easier to get into and quickly learn and grasp. And there are various positions and internships that are aligned towards that skill set that you can quickly acquire. And when you combine that with the understanding of pharma world and the life science world, which we just discussed, and we saw a glimpse of it today in terms of the clinical trials phases and how would you generate clinical study reports from data sets and stuff like that, it becomes very easy to get into the pharma world. So once you do that, then there is a career progression that you could have in taking up further senior level positions that may look like this, which are more of data scientists positions, principal data scientists, statistical SAS programmers, and biotech clinical scientists. And of course, there are other advanced senior level management positions that you can lead into after this. There are more of managerial in nature with an understanding of clinical trials and of course with SAS programming as well. So those are the various career opportunities that you can imagine getting into with skill sets of clinical trials and SAS programming that we just saw in this few minutes that we got today. However, I should mention that the training that we have on Internshala is a vast training that we have put together for you. And should you enroll in it, it offers you that full end-to-end understanding and skill set generation from clinical trials and use of SAS, and how would you apply that into the pharma world. So I really implore you and urge you to take a look at that. So with that, I would like to summarize in terms of what did we learn today, followed by some general questions that you may want me to answer. So what did we learn today was really the high-level clinical trials phases, and those were the phase 1, 2, and 3, and of course it was preceded by the preclinical phase, and we also saw the components of the pharma industry, which pertains to the patient and how they are involved in the use of the investigational new drug in the various phases of the clinical trials. the drug development process, which is again the clinical trials process, the phases of clinical trials, and more importantly, how you can use SAS as a programming tool for the data that is captured in the various phases of the clinical trials, and how you can use that for analysis and reporting to the regulatory authorities. We also saw an example of how do we build clinical study reports using the demographics table as an example. And the videos that we have as part of this training on Internshala will walk you through precisely this example in detail with full handholding of how you would generate the report step by step. So we do that as part of the training. And then we also looked into some of the SAS programming basics, which pertain to the variables and observations, some quick syntax on how SAS programming looks like in terms of the data step, the proc step, and how you generate demographics table from that. So with that, I would like to open up the floor for some questions that you might have.
Thank you for the amazing webinar, Aslam. It was really great, and I'm sure we all got to learn a lot of new things today. So now we can open the floor for some questions. But before we take the audience question, so I have just one question for you. So, as somebody who is new to this domain and somebody who eagerly wants to learn more and grow more, so are there any courses that I can take? What's the right path?
Yeah, like I mentioned, the best bet or the best option that you have is to take a look at what we have on the Internshala platform, because we did tremendous effort in putting together the training on SAS programming and the clinical trials on one platform for you to take a look at. So it's an action-packed 12 to 15 hours of training that you can really look into that is accompanied by not only just lectures and videos, but also practical examples how you can apply those skill sets, and it accompanies with various assignments and ends with really great projects that anyone can do on their own at their comfort, because SAS is available for free, like I mentioned, at their own comfort whenever they want, and we provide that hand holding as part of the training.
That's right. And for all the keen learners who are here today, Internshala Trainings is offering a special discount on our clinical trial analysis and reporting training. So you can visit the link that is in the YouTube video's description and use code practicals10 to avail an additional 10% discount. So what are you waiting for? Just go and check it out right now. And for everybody who has their questions, Aslam can now will be taking like 3 to 4 questions. So you all can just type them in. And Aslam, if you could please answer them.
Yeah, so let me just quickly browse through and answer some of the questions I see here. So I see some questions around what is the future of SAS in competition with Python and R language? That's a great question. I should say it's not a competition between SAS and Python and R language, but rather they go hand in hand as an ecosystem of skill sets that you can acquire, because SAS, like I said, it's a predominant tool in the pharma world. Python and R cannot replace it in areas that it has been used for so many years. It's just because of the nature of the programming and the nature of the deliverables that are constructed from SAS. It cannot be done by using those programming languages. However, I should say that R and Python are being used in areas where they can make things faster, along with SAS programming. So if you have a full host of skill sets, it will certainly help you. Where can I explore for SAS program? Or is that what I think I understood this to be? Well, SAS programming has a whole host of material that's out there, because like I mentioned, SAS Institute is the creator of the SAS software, and they have a full knowledge base that is created for you to explore with. And what we do is, as part of the training, we will show you how you can go out and explore those other knowledge bases that are out there. And it's a large following throughout the globe in terms of the SAS programmers who are there, who have put out enormous amount of information for you to explore and be part of certain SAS user groups that you can join and learn more from it. The question around, is SAS program and clinical SAS program the same? Yes, in a way, because like I mentioned, SAS programming is used in clinical setting a lot. So in that sense, it is the same. However, clinical trials, the concept of clinical trials is different from just SAS programming, because SAS programming could be used in any industry, whether it be finance or pharma or insurance or any other places. So it's just a programming tool. Let me quickly browse through other questions. What is the advantage of using SAS over Python? I think I already answered that. What is the future scope in SAS programming? Is it normal SAS and clinical SAS programming the same? I think I answered that. And we discussed the future scope in SAS programming, again, is tied to the industry that you're working in. And I already mentioned to you how it can be used in the pharma industry and how it has it takes you through that career path once you learn the SAS skill set from the entry positions to the senior level positions into the management level positions. Okay, let me go through further. How can I master SAS programming? Again, the best option is take this training on Internshala. That's the best thing you can do. And apart from that, there are various other sources. And what I do as part of this training is precisely that, is to simplify and walk you through every step of SAS programming. So do not get overwhelmed. And one of the things I do is to ensure that you do not get overwhelmed during the training.
Right. I think we can just take one more question.
Yeah. I think one last question.
Yeah.
Okay. Are all modules covered in this training? Like Hannah, I'm not sure what that means. Hannah, if you're mentioning about SAP, Hannah, I'm not sure if I can answer that question. Maybe the last question will be, on SAS website, can we learn clinical SAS with provided demo? Website, you will have some high-level idea, but not the detailed level of programming and training that we provide as part of our course.
Right.
With that, I'll hand it over back to you, Manpreet.
Yeah. Thanks, Aslam. That will be all for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon for updates regarding our upcoming webinar. So I would like to inform you all that we have a webinar happening next Friday, that is 11th March, and it will be on Tableau, Master the Data Visualization Tool, and the session will be taken by Mr. Farzan. So you all can just, if you want to register for this session, so I'll just ping the link in the chat and you all can go and register right now. The registrations are open for this webinar. So we hope to see you guys there. And thank you so much for joining. And thanks, Aslam, again. And take care, everybody. Bye.
Thanks,
Stay
everyone.
safe.